bond between a parent and a child is supposed to mean unconditional love and sacrifice. But when that love is met with cold, insatiable greed, the family home can become a slaughterhouse. This is the reality of a deeply spoiled son who is handed everything on a silver platter. Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy lived the American dream in a quiet, affluent Knoxville, Tennessee neighborhood. Joe Sr. was a pipeline engineering designer, and Lisa was a human resources administrator. Married for over 3 decades, they worked tirelessly to provide for their family, but their generosity became a fatal vulnerability when it came to their son, Joel Guy Jr. By the age of 28, Joel Jr. was a masterclass in extreme entitlement. He had never held a real job or paid a utility bill. For 9 years, he lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, attending Louisiana State University. He masqueraded as an ambitious student studying to become a bilingual plastic surgeon. The reality was a stark, lazy contrast. He rarely attended classes and showed zero progress toward graduation. Every month, Joel Sr. and Lisa deposited money directly into his bank account, paying for his rent, groceries, and tuition, funding a perpetual, responsibility-free adolescence. In the fall of 2016, the parents finally drew a line. They were ready to retire, sell their house, buy an RV, and travel the country. To achieve this, the bank of mom and dad had to close. They planned to sit Joel Jr. down during the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday and deliver the final verdict. The endless flow of cash was permanently stopping. He had to get a job. Faced with the terrifying prospect of working, Joel Jr. looked to his parents' life insurance policies. He grabbed a notebook and mapped out the exact financial calculations of their deaths, explicitly writing $500,000 would be all mine. Noting that if his mother died first, the money all goes to dad, he realized both parents had to die to secure his payday. For a narcissistic young man who viewed his family as walking ATMs, the solution was chillingly simple. He would eliminate them, collect the $500,000, and continue his life of luxury. His notebook became a terrifying, step-by-step manual for double homicide and body disposal. He wrote detailed shopping lists for carving knives, heavy-duty plastic storage bins, muriatic acid, food-grade hydrogen peroxide, and lye. Another unused hardware note read, "Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat." In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, he systematically purchased these supplies across Louisiana and Tennessee. He packed his murder kit, drove home, and sat at the holiday dinner table playing the loving son, biding his time. On Saturday, November 26th, the house emptied out. Lisa left to buy groceries. Joel Jr. moved upstairs and ambushed his 61-year-old father. During the massive fight, Joel Jr. sustained deep defensive lacerations to his own hands, but he eventually overpowered and killed his father. When 55-year-old Lisa returned, she walked through the front door and dropped her groceries in the foyer. Her son attacked her instantly. Joel Jr. transitioned to the grotesque destruction of evidence. He dragged their bodies into the bathrooms and began the systematic dismemberment of the people who had given him everything. He placed their remains into plastic bins, then poured in the muriatic acid, lye, and hydrogen peroxide. This highly corrosive chemical bath was designed to break down tissue, a horrifying concoction later described in court as a diabolical stew. He packed his bags, stole his parents' wallets, and drove back to Louisiana. His post-crime behavior was a chilling display of sociopathy. Arriving in Baton Rouge, he casually visited the LSU Student Health Clinic to treat the deep gashes on his hands, calmly claiming he had accidentally cut himself. He then logged online, used his dead mother's credit card to pay for his internet service, and attempted to transfer money from his parents' accounts to his own. He actively searched how to hide his IP address and how life insurance pays out in missing persons cases. The master plan unraveled on Monday morning when Lisa failed to show up for work. Her employer requested a welfare check. Officers arrived at the Locked Guy residence. Looking through the front window, they saw the groceries sitting abandoned in the vestibule, signaling Lisa was interrupted immediately upon entry. Sensing a crisis, they breached the home. The 90-degree heat hit them instantly, followed by the sickening odor of chemicals. The seasoned investigators encountered a scene straight out of a horror film. Inside Joel Jr.'s backpack in the guest bedroom, they found the notebook detailing the exact blueprint of the massacre. The following day, law enforcement arrested Joel Guy Jr. outside his apartment complex, walking toward his car. Interrogated by detectives, he maintained a dead-eyed silence, refusing to give any narrative and pleading not guilty despite the overwhelming physical evidence. At his 2020 trial, the prosecution presented a flawless case: receipts, security footage, and handwritten notebook. Joel Jr. sat at the defense table with a blank stare, watching graphic crime scene photos without shedding a single tear. In a deeply bizarre legal maneuver, he filed a motion representing himself, explicitly asking the judge to sentence him to death and demanding his attorneys be legally barred from presenting mitigating evidence. The judge swiftly denied the motion. The jury needed barely 3 hours to find him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of abuse of a corpse. During sentencing, Judge Steve Sword noted that while Joel Jr. possessed high intellect, the execution of the murders was incredibly foolish due to the massive, undeniable trail of evidence he left behind. The judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His defense team later appealed, arguing the police lacked a warrant for the initial welfare check, but the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction in 2023. Joel Guy Jr. wanted a life completely provided for by someone else, without ever having to work. He achieved his goal. The 28-year-old who butchered his parents for a payout is serving his consecutive life sentences at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tennessee. He will spend the rest of his natural life locked inside a maximum security concrete cell, entirely funded by the state, never to walk free again. Some killers are driven by a sudden fit of rage, and others by a calculated desire for revenge. But occasionally, a crime is born from something far more hollow, pure, unadulterated narcissism. For most people, a lie is a temporary shield to avoid getting in trouble. But for an arrogant, spoiled teenager in the United Kingdom, a lie became an entire alternate reality. When the truth finally threatened to shatter his carefully constructed illusion of wealth and prestige, he did not apologize or confess. Instead, he picked up a carving knife, butchered his parents, and stepped over them to catch a first-class flight to a luxury vacation. Brian Blackwell was the ultimate golden child, raised in the affluent village of Melling in Merseyside, England. He was the only son of Sidney and Jacqueline Blackwell. His parents were older. Sidney was a 72-year-old retired accountant, and Jacqueline was a 61-year-old former antiques dealer. They doted on Brian to an extreme degree, indulging his every whim and shielding him from real-world consequences. Neighbors referred to the boy as Little Lord Fauntleroy because of his constant demands and his parents' willingness to buy him whatever he wanted. On the surface, the investment seemed to be paying off. Brian was a straight-A student, highly intelligent, and seemingly bound for greatness. But beneath the academic achievements lay a deeply twisted, fragile ego. In the summer of 2004, 18-year-old Brian began dating a girl named Amal Sabah. Amal came from a wealthy family, and Brian felt an overwhelming need to prove that he was not only her equal, but vastly superior. He could not just be a smart teenager from the suburbs. He had to be a global superstar. Brian fabricated an entirely fake life. He told Amal and her family that he was a professional tennis prodigy. He claimed he was playing in high-stakes international tournaments and had just signed a massive £70,000 sponsorship deal with Nike. He backed up these lies by claiming he had been accepted as a prestigious scholar at Oxford University. To maintain this incredible illusion, Brian digitally fabricated an entire supporting cast. He created a fictitious tennis manager named Jason. Brian would routinely send emails and text messages to Amal from Jason to corroborate his fake tournament schedules and massive sponsorship payouts. But fake sponsorships do not pay real bills. Brian needed cash to keep the charade alive. He began secretly intercepting his parents' mail and stealing their financial information. He systematically forged his father's signature and applied for 13 different credit cards in Sidney's name. With his fraudulent financial arsenal, Brian completely drained his parents' savings and racked up massive debts. He bought Amal a brand new car, showered her with lavish gifts, and promised her a staggering ultra-luxury holiday to the United States. He was spending tens of thousands of pounds of stolen money to play the role of a millionaire playboy. The collision between Brian's fantasy world and reality was inevitable. On July 25, 2004, the illusion violently collapsed. Sidney Blackwell discovered the massive web of financial fraud. He found the maxed-out credit card statements, the drained bank accounts, and the forged signatures. He realized his perfect son had stolen his identity and ruined the family's finances to impress a teenage girlfriend. Sidney confronted his son inside their home. He demanded answers and made it clear that the lies and the theft were over. For Brian, this confrontation was not just about getting in trouble for stealing money. It was an existential threat to his entire identity. If his father exposed the fraud, the tennis prodigy illusion would die and Amal would leave him. To protect his ego, Brian decided His parents had to die. Brian grabbed a heavy claw hammer and a 10-inch carving knife. He walked into the living room and attacked his 72-year-old father, who was sitting quietly in an armchair. Brian walked down the hall to the bathroom, where his 61-year-old mother, Jacqueline, was drawing a bath. He instantly turned the weapons on her. The parents who had given him everything lay dead in their own home. What followed the murders was a display of psychopathy so chilling it defies basic human understanding. Brian washed his parents' blood off his hands and disposed of the claw hammer and the carving knife so thoroughly that police never recovered them. Just hours after the slaughter, he sat down at a computer and used his dead father's financial details to book first-class flights to New York online, actively funding his alibi with his victims' money. The next day, Brian drove his girlfriend Amal to his house to pack for their trip. He casually walked inside, stepped past the gruesome crime scene, packed his bags, retrieved his passport, and walked back out to the car with a smile. For the next several weeks, Brian lived out his millionaire fantasy. They stayed in a presidential suite at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. They flew to Miami and sat on VIP beaches. They traveled to San Francisco and Barbados. Brian paid for every luxury dinner and 5-star hotel room, using the very same credit cards he had murdered his parents to keep. He spent over £30,000 on the trip. Whenever Amal asked about his parents, Brian smoothly lied, claiming they were on an extended holiday in Spain and were unreachable. Eventually, the vacation ended and the couple returned to the United Kingdom. Brian moved into Amal's house, continuing the charade. But back in Melling, nature was taking its course. Weeks had passed since the brutal double homicide. Neighbors began to notice a thick swarm of flies covering the inside of the Blackwell's front windows. On September 5, 2004, investigators forced entry into the Blackwell home. They found the heavily decomposed bodies of Sydney in the living room and Jacqueline in the bathroom, surrounded by the horrific evidence of the hammer and knife attack. Police immediately tracked down Brian. During intense interrogation, he maintained his web of lies. He claimed he was in the United States when the murders happened and put on an award-winning performance of a grieving son, suggesting his parents were killed by burglars or professional hitmen. But his lies unraveled fast. Detectives presented him with the massive credit card debt, the forged signatures, the fake emails from Jason, and the timeline of his extravagant American vacation. Faced with undeniable forensic and financial proof, Brian finally dropped the act after 2 days of questioning and confessed to the killings. The legal proceedings that followed resulted in a shocking twist. 4 top forensic psychiatrists unanimously agreed that Brian suffered from severe narcissistic personality disorder. The diagnosis was so extreme that experts testified Blackwell genuinely believed his own lies about being a sponsored tennis star. His motive wasn't just hiding stolen money. He suffered an explosive narcissistic rage because his father's confrontation threatened to destroy his delusional grandiosity. Because of this unanimous medical consensus, the prosecution made the highly unusual decision to drop the murder charges and accept the plea of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The legal system determined that his severe narcissism constituted an abnormality of mind. Brian Blackwell was given a life sentence, but it came with a minimum tariff of only 12 years. The boy who demanded a life of 5-star hotels and international acclaim committed one of the most brutal acts of familial betrayal in modern history. But unlike the other names on this list who will rot behind bars forever, the justice system offered Brian a second chance. He served his minimum term and was officially released on parole in 2016 at the age of 30. Under UK law, he is subject to lifelong parole conditions, but he is currently living freely in the community with a new identity, walking the streets as a free man while his parents rest in the graves he put them in.
I picked her up and had her just like dangling off the ground, and she just missed herself, and it took me a half an hour to kill her. Set a timer. That's the only time I had my phone, and it took me like a half an hour after I hit start.
Trust is the foundation of every lifelong friendship. You grow up alongside someone, share your deepest secrets, and assume they have your back. You trust them with your vulnerabilities, and you certainly trust them with your life. But what happens when that childhood bond is completely hollow? What happens when the person sitting across from you isn't looking at a friend, but at a walking payday? For one 19-year-old in New Jersey, a lifetime of friendship was erased and replaced by a cold, calculated price tag. Sarah Stern and Liam McAtisney were fixtures in each other's lives in the coastal town of Neptune City. They navigated middle school and high school together, part of a tight-knit inner circle that included another classmate, Preston Taylor. Sarah was a bright, trusting 19-year-old with a passion for art and digital media. Liam was her confidant, the guy she thought she could rely on for anything. But beneath Liam's friendly exterior was an obsession with wealth and a total refusal to work for it. He wanted to be rich, and he didn't care who had to die to make it happen. The catalyst for this tragedy was a massive discovery Sarah made while sorting through her deceased mother's belongings. Hidden in a safe was a shoebox filled with vintage, decades-old currency, a secret inheritance totaling about $10,000. Excited and naive, Sarah showed the money to Liam. She thought she was sharing a moment of financial relief with a best friend. Liam looked at that shoebox and saw his own personal lottery ticket. He spent the next 6 months methodically plotting Sarah's execution. He realized he needed help to handle the logistics, so he recruited their mutual friend, Preston Taylor, the same boy who had been Sarah's junior prom date. Liam offered Preston a cut of the cash to help dispose of the body and stage the crime as a suicide. For the price of a few $1,000s, Preston agreed to help murder his old friend. On the afternoon of December 2nd, 2016, Liam went to Sarah's house to hang out. He walked through the front door, smiled, and waited for her to turn her back. He ambushed her, lifting the 19-year-old completely off the ground and choking her with his bare hands. Then he did something truly demonic. Liam took out his cell phone, opened the stopwatch application, and began timing his best friend's death. He stood over her for 30 minutes, watching the clock until her heart finally stopped. Afterward, he left her body on the bathroom floor and casually went to work his normal shift at a local restaurant, leaving Sarah to be picked up later that night. Under the cover of darkness, Liam and Preston returned. They stuffed Sarah into the passenger seat of her own 1994 Oldsmobile and drove a 2-car convoy to the Route 35 bridge in Belmar. They dragged Sarah to the railing and threw her into the freezing waters of the Shark River. To finish the illusion, they left the car parked on the bridge with the keys in the ignition. The abandoned car was found hours later, sparking a massive surge. Liam played the role of the devastated best friend perfectly. He organized search parties and gave heartfelt media interviews, expressing shock. When police first questioned him, he laid down a calculated false trail, telling detectives Sarah had been severely depressed and had talked about running away to Canada to escape her crazy father. But Liam's arrogance was his downfall. Months before the murder, he had pitched a movie script about killing a girl for money to a friend, amateur filmmaker Anthony Curry. When Anthony saw the news, he went straight to the police. Law enforcement equipped Anthony's car with hidden recording equipment and sent him to meet Liam. On January 31st, 2017, Liam climbed into the passenger seat of Anthony's car. Believing he was safely bragging to a peer, he delivered a casual, remorseless confession. He detailed the murder with zero empathy, his only emotion being deep annoyance. He complained bitterly about the quality of the money, whining that the vintage bills were burnt or something and were of such terrible quality he didn't know if the bank would even take them. He even mocked Sarah's dog, telling Anthony, "Her dog laid there and watched as I killed her. It didn't do anything." He expressed zero regret for taking a human life. His only regret was that he didn't get the full $100,000 he expected. The police had everything. Liam and Preston were arrested. Preston immediately folded, leading police to 2 buried safes containing the stolen money and agreeing to testify against Liam. At the 2019 trial, the jury watched the hidden camera footage in stunned silence. Liam's defense attorney tried a desperate pivot, arguing the video wasn't a confession, but rather Liam auditioning and improvising a fake story to impress a filmmaker. The jury didn't buy it. The jury found Liam McCattersney guilty of first-degree murder, robbery, and desecration of human remains. At sentencing, Superior Court judge highlighted Liam's total lack of remorse, noting his only disappointment was in the quality of the cash. Liam was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Preston Taylor received 18 years for his role in the betrayal. Liam McCattersney appealed his conviction, but the New Jersey Appellate Court upheld the sentence in 2023. Sarah Stern's remains have never been found, leaving her family with no grave to visit. Liam wanted a fast track to wealth. He traded his best friend's life for a handful of damaged, outdated bills. Now, he will spend every day of his natural life inside the New Jersey State Prison, guaranteed to die exactly where he belongs. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, security is an absolute. Families pay millions to live behind high walls, electrified fences, and 24-hour armed patrols, believing they are insulated from the dangers of the outside world. But in January 2015, inside the De Zalza Winelands Golf Estate, one of the most secure luxury developments in South Africa, the threat didn't scale the fence. It was already inside the house. sitting at the dinner table. Martin Van Breda was a self-made multi-millionaire, a titan of the business world with a global portfolio of companies. He and his wife, Teresa, lived a life of extreme privilege with their 3 children, 22-year-old Rudy, 20-year-old Henry, and 16-year-old Marley. To the outside world, they were the pinnacle of success, but Henry was the family's dark secret. Despite being a trust fund kid with access to limitless resources, he was a university dropout with a massive spiraling addiction to tick, South African crystal meth. When his parents finally discovered the depth of his habit and threatened to cut off his endless supply of cash to force him into rehab, Henry didn't look for a clinic. He looked for the family's 4.5-pound felling axe. On the night of January 26, 2015, the Van Breda family was inside their multi-million-dollar mansion. There were no signs of a breach, no alarms triggered, and the estate's thermal security cameras showed absolutely no movement on the perimeter. Henry waited until the early hours of the morning. While his family slept, he grabbed the heavy axe from the house and a knife from the kitchen. He moved first to the bedroom shared by his father and his older brother Rudy. Henry launched a blitz attack, using the axe to butcher Rudy in his bed. When his father, Martin, rushed into the room to protect his eldest son, Henry turned the axe on him. Henry then moved into the hallway and attacked his mother, Teresa, and his 16-year-old sister, Marley. He didn't call for help. Instead, he spent nearly 3 hours staging the scene. He used a kitchen knife to inflict minor, superficial cat scratches on his own chest and arms, parallel, uniform wounds in non-sensitive areas he could easily reach. He then cleaned the knife and placed it back in the kitchen drawer. During this 3-hour window, while his sister lay nearby clinging to life, Henri sat in the kitchen and smoked 3 cigarettes. Even more chilling, at 4:27 a.m., Henri used his phone to Google the Christopher Porco case, a 2004 American murder where a son attacked his parents with an axe. He was literally researching how to get away with the exact crime he had just committed. The most damning evidence is the emergency phone call, placed nearly 4 hours after the attack. When Henry finally called, his voice was disturbingly calm. He spoke to the dispatcher with a polite demeanor, even giggling and smirking during the call. The operator later testified she initially thought it was a prank. Henry described a masked black man who had supposedly broken into the most secure estate in the country, laughed while killing his family, and then ran away. He claimed he was in the bathroom with diarrhea when the attack started and only fainted after a brief scuffle with the intruder. When paramedics arrived, they found a house of absolute carnage. Martin, Teresa, and Rudy were dead. Miraculously, 16-year-old Marley was still alive, despite the high-velocity axe wounds to her head and neck. Henri was standing in a house with his neat textbook self-inflicted wounds, looking entirely unfazed. The investigation dismantled his story within days. Forensics proved the laughing intruder was a myth. There was no DNA of an outsider, and the security logs proved no one had entered or exited the estate. Most importantly, the blood spatter on Henri's shorts proved he was standing directly over his father and brother when the axe struck them. While the case was being built, Henri's behavior was that of a classic spoiled sociopath. He spent his time living a life of leisure, dating a new girlfriend, and acting as if his family's blood wasn't still being scrubbed off the walls of their mansion. He believed his status and his fictional intruder story would protect him. At his trial in 2017, the prosecution detailed his drug habit and the financial motive, clear out the bloodline to secure a multi-million-dollar inheritance that was about to be taken away. In June 2018, Henri Van Breda was found guilty and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 15 years for the attempted murder of his sister. Henri Van Breda survived the attack, but was left with retrograde amnesia, unable to remember the face of the monster who held the axe. Henri maintained his innocence through the entire trial, never offering a confession. In 2019, the Constitutional Court of South Africa dismissed his final application for leave to appeal. Now 31 years old, Henri is serving his time at Luakop Prison in Gauteng, having been relocated in 2022 after being attacked by other inmates. He won't even be eligible for parole until roughly 2043. The spoiled heir who tried to hack his way into a fortune learned the hard way that no amount of trust fund money can hide the truth from forensic science. In the coastal enclaves of Orange County, California, wealth is measured by the sprawling size of the estate and the thickness of the family trust. Andrus and Bradford Sachs were the embodiment of this success. As titans of the real estate industry, with a portfolio worth tens of millions of dollars, they lived in a hilltop mansion in San Juan Capistrano, providing their 5 children with a life of extreme luxury. But beneath the surface of this multi-million-dollar lifestyle, their 19-year-old son, Ashton Sachs, was cultivating a toxic, deep-seated resentment. He didn't just want a piece of the family fortune, he wanted to punish the people who controlled it. Ashton was a master of the spoiled victim complex. Despite living in a world of private jets and luxury vacations, he convinced himself he was the least favorite child. He spent his days in a $1.1 million condominium in Seattle, funded entirely by his parents, while he supposedly attended college. In reality, Ashton was a university dropout who spent his time smoking marijuana and obsessing over perceived slights. He was particularly bitter that his mother hadn't taken him seriously after a previous suicide attempt, and he became convinced he was being phased out of the family's future. The plan for the massacre was not a sudden impulse. It was a calculated military-style operation. Weeks before the shooting, Ashton walked into a Seattle gun store and legally purchased a Savage Arms .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle. He explicitly told investigators later that he chose to make the 1,200-mile trip by car specifically because he knew he couldn't sneak a firearm onto a plane. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a journey of cold, premeditated intent. Ashton's digital footprint revealed the depth of his planning. Before he even left Seattle, his search history included insanity defense and parole terms. He was mapping out his legal strategy before he had even pulled the trigger. He drove 18 hours straight, fueled by a dark, narcissistic rage, arriving at the family mansion in the early hours of February 9th, 2014. Ashton used his own key to enter the darkened home. He moved through the silent halls of the estate with the precision of an assassin. He entered the master bedroom where his parents, 54-year-old Andrus and 57-year-old Bradford, were fast asleep. He pumped 10 bullets into his mother and 12 into his father. The couple never stood a chance. They were executed in the very bed they had worked a lifetime to provide. But Ashton's twisted rush didn't end there. He moved to the bedroom of his 8-year-old brother, Landon. As the young boy lay sleeping, Ashton fired into his body. The bullet left him permanently paralyzed. He then entered the room of his 17-year-old sister, Alexis, and fired at her, narrowly missing her head. A second sister was also in the house, but she remained unheard and unharmed as Ashton finished his work. The cleanup was as calculated as the kill. Ashton didn't drive back to Seattle. Instead, he abandoned his car at a family-owned business property in Santa Ana, with the murder weapon hidden in the trunk. He then took a taxi to John Wayne Airport and hopped on a flight back to Washington. He even arranged for the car to be shipped back to him in Seattle later, a final attempt to put physical distance between himself and the ballistic evidence. In the aftermath, Ashton put on an award-winning performance. He returned to California to be with his surviving siblings, even sitting at the hospital bedside of the 8-year-old brother he had paralyzed. At his parents' funeral, Ashton gave a tearful public eulogy, calling them perfect and his heroes. This was the ultimate display of sociopathy, weeping for the very people he had personally riddled with 22 bullets. When detectives first confronted him, Ashton tried to play a game. He told them his final answer, like he was on a game show, was that he was in Washington during the murders. But the game ended when investigators revealed they had surveillance footage of him at John Wayne Airport on the morning of the massacre. Confronted with the digital and physical evidence, Ashton finally confessed, claiming he felt his parents didn't love him and that he was driven by a dark impulse he couldn't control. In a bizarre display of manipulation during his legal proceedings, Ashton fired his public defender and chose to represent himself. Prosecutors alleged he did this solely to gain special privileges in jail, such as unlimited phone use, which he used to barter with other inmates for three-way calls. He wasn't looking for justice. He was looking for a way to maintain his spoiled lifestyle behind bars. In 2016, Judge Greg Prickett highlighted the shameless brutality of the crime. He sentenced Ashton Sachs to more than 4 lifetimes plus 100 years in prison to ensure he could never mathematically be eligible for release. As of 2026, Ashton is serving his life sentence at Ironwood State Prison in California. His older brother, Miles, took legal guardianship of the younger siblings, picking up the pieces of a family Ashton tried to erase. The 19-year-old who felt least favorite because he only had $1 million condo and a trust fund will now spend the rest of his life in a 6-by-9-foot cell, a permanent ward of the state he tried to outsmart. Social media has created a generation obsessed with the aesthetic of wealth, a curated reality where designer labels and luxury vacations are the only currency that matters. For most, it's harmless posturing, but for 19-year-old Alan Hobie, the need to project a millionaire lifestyle was a terminal obsession. Alan was a self-described shopaholic and a political science student at the University of Oklahoma who viewed himself as a high society prince. But when his parents grew tired of funding his delusions and cut off his credit cards, Alan decided that his family's lives were worth less than a $3,000 loan shark debt. Alan grew up in Marlow, Oklahoma, where his family was prominent and respected. His father, John Hubrey, was the publisher of the Marlow Review newspaper, and his mother, Joy, was a beloved community leader. They lived in a comfortable home and provided Alan with every advantage. But Alan was never satisfied with comfortable. He wanted the life of an elite socialite. He spent his time posting photos of high-end shopping bags, expensive watches, and European trips on Instagram, desperate for the validation of strangers. To fund this, he wasn't just spending an allowance. He was a member of Shoppers Anonymous, who had reportedly blown through $20,000 in just his first month at university. To fuel this addiction, Alan turned to crime early. He began stealing his grandmother's credit cards, racking up thousands in fraudulent charges. When his parents discovered the theft, they reported him to the police, hoping the legal system would snap him back to reality. Alan was placed on a delayed sentencing program for felony credit card fraud. This meant he had a pending conviction hanging over his head. Any slip-up would trigger an immediate prison sentence. His parents stripped him of his financial support, but Alan had already secretly borrowed $3,000 from a high-interest loan shark to fund a trip to Europe. With the debt coming due and his prince persona at stake, Alan decided to liquidate his family's lives to secure his inheritance. On Friday, October 10, 2014, Alan set his plan into motion with bureaucratic coldness. He drove from his dorm in Norman back to Marlow, stopping first at his father's office. He waited for the right moment and stole a 9mm Walther handgun from his father's truck, the very weapon he would use to erase his bloodline. Alan entered the family home and waited. His mother, Joy, was the first to arrive. Alan didn't hesitate. He walked up to the woman who had raised him and whom he had physically attacked 2 years prior over money and shot her in the kitchen. For the next hour, Alan sat in the house with his mother's body, waiting for his 17-year-old sister, Catherine, to come home from school. When she walked through the door, Alan executed her, shooting her in the head. He waited another hour for his father. When John Huby entered his home, Alan ambushed him. In less than 3 hours, Alan Huby had wiped out his entire family for the price of a used car. To cover his tracks, he stole the disk from the home security system to hide his entry and exit, later disposing of it in a lake, along with the murder weapon and a pair of blue gloves. His post-crime behavior was a masterclass in sociopathy. After stepping over the bodies of his parents and sister, Alan went to the Ritz-Carlton in Dallas for a celebration trip. He posted photos of himself drinking champagne and relaxing, all while knowing his family lay dead in the kitchen. While at the luxury hotel, he used his phone to search for how to inherit a trust fund. The bodies weren't discovered until Monday morning, October 13th, when a housekeeper found the carnage. Marlowe was paralyzed with shock. Investigators initially looked for external enemies of the newspaper publisher, but the spotlight quickly shifted to the son, with a pending felony and a desperate need to cash. When detectives brought Alan in for questioning, he initially cried crocodile tears, but after failing a polygraph test, his prince facade crumbled and he gave a chilling, step-by-step confession. He told police he killed them simply because he needed the money. While in jail awaiting trial, Alan wrote a bizarre letter to the Oklahoman, stating he 100% welcomed the death penalty because his crimes were unspeakable. However, when the time came, he took a plea deal to avoid it. The prosecution only agreed to the deal because the extended Hubrey family requested it, desperate to avoid the trauma of a death penalty trial and decades of appeals. In 2015, Alan Hubrey was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As of 2026, the 31-year-old, who once obsessed over designer labels, is an inmate at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He has lost all contact with surviving family members. Alan Hubrey wanted to be the center of attention. He succeeded, trading a life of extreme privilege for a lifetime of isolation in a concrete cell. The image of the all-American girl is a powerful cultural staple, the sweet, soft-spoken daughter who sings in the church choir and follows every house rule. In 2008, 16-year-old Erin Caffey was the embodiment of this ideal in the small town of Alba, Texas. She was a talented singer, a dedicated student, and the pride of her deeply religious parents, Terry and Penny Caffey. But beneath the Sunday school dresses and the high-pitched giggles was a girl who felt a toxic level of entitlement. When her parents finally set a boundary she didn't like, She didn't just rebel, she orchestrated a massacre that wiped out her entire family in a single, blood-soaked night. The conflict began with an ultimatum. Erin had started dating 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson, a high school dropout with a reputation for trouble. As Erin's grades began to slip and her behavior at home grew defiant, Terry and Penny gave her a specific set of rules. She could only see Charlie if she maintained an A average and stopped seeing him on school nights. Erin's response, written privately in her journal, was chillingly direct. "I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them all." Erin didn't view her parents as protectors. She saw them as villains standing in the way of her true love. Over several weeks, she manipulated Charlie and his friend, Charles Wade, into believing that the only way she and Charlie could be together was if her family was removed. She used her sweet girl persona to weaponize Charlie's obsession, fabricating stories of abuse to fuel his rage. There were actually 2 previous dates set for the murder that fell through because Charlie got cold feet, but Erin berated him via text, demanding he finish the job. On the night of March 1st, 2008, the plan was finally executed. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade crept into the Cafe family home, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, a hunting knife, and a machete. Erin wasn't miles away. She was sitting in the getaway car parked right outside, accompanied by a 4th accomplice, 18-year-old driver Bobby Johnson. As the slaughter began, Erin was close enough to hear the gunshots and the screams of her family. Bobby later testified that Erin remained completely calm, even reaching over to adjust the radio and humming along to the music while her family was being erased. The 2 men entered the master bedroom and opened fire on Terry and Penny while they slept. The killers then moved to the bedrooms of Erin's younger brothers, 13-year-old Tyler and 8-year-old Matthew. Because they had run out of ammunition after shooting Tyler, they used knives to finish killing 8-year-old Matthew in his bed. To ensure no survivors could testify, the killers set the house on fire. Terry Caffey, somehow still alive after 5 gunshot wounds, managed to crawl out of a bathroom window as the structure collapsed in flames. He crawled 400 yards through the woods to a neighbor's house, fueled by the desperate, mistaken hope that Erin had been kidnapped. When police located Erin at Charlie Wilkinson's house a few hours later, she initially played the victim, claiming she had been abducted, but the police had recorded the conversation between her and Charlie in the back of the patrol car. Instead of acting like a hostage, Erin was caught on tape whispering "I love you" to Charlie and asking him if he had done it. The most haunting display of Erin's sociopathy occurred while Terry was in the hospital, fighting for his life. Erin visited his bedside, pretending to be a fellow survivor. She sat by her father and sang hymns to him, the same songs she had performed in the church choir, all while knowing she had ordered the machete attack on his wife and the stabbing of his sons. The trial shook the East Texas community to its core. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade avoided the death penalty only because Terry Caffey, citing his deep religious beliefs, personally pleaded with the district attorney to spare their lives. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Erin Caffey was convicted on multiple counts of capital murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 25 years. Because of her age at the time of the crime, Texas law mandates she be eligible for parole after serving 40 years. As of 2026, Erin remains at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has attempted several appeals based on ineffective counsel, but all have been denied. She reportedly continues to participate in prison choir programs, still playing the part of the sweet girl, while the father she tried to kill lives with the memory of the night his daughter burned their world to the ground.
I stopped when I killed my mother.
You were what?
I was laughing when I killed my mother.
You were laughing? Why were you laughing?
I don't know.
In most households, a typical teenage rebellion involves a slammed door or a heated argument over grades. But for 15-year-old Zachary Davis of Hendersonville, Tennessee, the friction of daily life didn't lead to a typical outburst. It triggered a cold, mechanical decision to erase his mother from existence. Zachary was a socially isolated teenager who spent his nights immersed in the dark world of creepypasta, online horror legends, and macabre stories that fueled a growing detachment from reality. To his mother, Melanie Davis, he was a son who needed rules and structure. To Zachary, his mother was an obstacle that needed to be permanently deactivated. Melanie Davis was a hard-working single mother who had raised Zachary and his older brother Josh alone after their father passed away from cancer. She wanted Zachary to succeed, but he was failing his classes and staying up until dawn reading horror stories. To get him back on track, Melanie set a firm boundary. She took away Zachary's cell phone and restricted his internet access. For a boy whose entire world was digital horror, this wasn't just parenting, it was an act of war. He didn't feel a flash of hot anger, he felt a clinical, hollow frustration. He decided then that the only way to regain his freedom was to eliminate the person enforcing the rules. Zachary didn't snap in a moment of passion. He spent weeks calculating the most efficient way to commit the crime. He initially considered using a knife, but he eventually decided a sledgehammer would be more effective and less messy. For him personally, he went into the backyard and practiced his swing on a tree, gauging exactly how much force he needed to generate to crack a human skull in a single hit. On the night of August 10, 2012, Zachary waited for the house to go silent. Melanie was asleep in her bed, and his older brother, Josh, was in his room. Zachary went to the garage, retrieved a 12-pound sledgehammer, and walked into his mother's bedroom. Without a word, he swung the hammer with the force he had practiced. It killed her instantly. With his mother dead, Zachary moved to the next phase. He didn't want any witnesses. He grabbed a can of gasoline, poured it throughout the house, and ignited a fire while his brother was still inside. Before leaving, he placed a go-away sign on his bedroom door and left a note that read, "I'm sorry I had to do this, but I couldn't take it anymore." He then walked out of the house, leaving Josh to wake up in a death trap of smoke and flames. Miraculously, Josh managed to leap from a window and survive. Zachary didn't stay in the neighborhood. He fled the scene and began a trek that took him several miles away. When a sheriff's deputy finally spotted him on a backpass, Zachary was carrying a backpack. Inside wasn't just clothes, it was a gaming system, a notebook, and a kill list. He hadn't planned to stop at his mother. The list contained the names of several students from his school and other family members he intended to deactivate. The viral hook of this case is the chilling footage from his police interrogation. Zachary spoke with a level of detachment that unnerved seasoned investigators. When asked to describe the sound of the hammer hitting his mother's head, he didn't flinch. He made a squish sound and chuckled, telling the detectives he found the situation kind of funny because of how easily she had died. He described the impact as a wet thud and spoke about the massacre with the same boredom someone might use to describe a chore. He told them flatly that Melanie was simply getting on his nerves. During the trial, the prosecution presented Zachary as a predator who knew exactly what he was doing. A psychologist testified that while Zachary had a disorganized attachment style, he was legally sane and fully aware of his actions. Zachary sat through the entire proceeding with a blank, frozen expression. He never looked at his brother Josh, who was sobbing on the witness stand as he recounted the night he lost everything. The judge was repulsed by the teen's behavior. He noted that Zachary was a predator and described his lack of remorse as unfathomable. In 2014, Zachary Davis was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and aggravated arson. Despite being 15 at the time of the crime, the judge applied the full weight of the law. Zachary was sentenced to life in prison. Under Tennessee law, this carries a mandatory 51-year minimum before he is even eligible to apply for parole. Zachary Davis appealed his conviction in 2016, arguing that his confession should have been suppressed because of his age, but the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals denied the request. As of 2026, he is incarcerated at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. He once told an interviewer that he doesn't miss his mother and finds prison life quiet. He wanted to stop his mother from getting on his nerves, and he traded his soul and his freedom to do it. He will remain in a concrete box until he is an old man, a permanent resident of the dark reality he chose for himself. In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Bethlehem, New York, the Porker family lived a life that appeared to be the gold standard of the American middle class. Peter Porker was a respected state appellate court clerk, and his wife, Joan, was a beloved children's speech pathologist. They were known for their community involvement and their deep devotion to their two sons. But behind the manicured lawn of their home at 36 Broccoli Drive, their 21-year-old son, Christopher, was orchestrating a massive web of financial fraud. Chris was a student at the University of Rochester who viewed himself as a high-stakes player, a man who deserved a luxury lifestyle without the burden of earning it. When his parents finally caught him and threatened to expose the truth, Chris decided to erase the witnesses with a felling axe. Chris was a master of the spoiled frat boy persona. He desperately wanted to fit in with the wealthy elite at his university, so he began living far beyond his means. To fund his image, Chris didn't get a part-time job. He became a white-collar criminal. Years prior, he had staged a burglary at his own home while his parents were away, stealing laptops and electronics to sell on eBay. His parents suspected him, but kept it quiet. hoping he'd change. Instead, he escalated. He secretly forged his father's signature on a tuition bill and took out a $31,000 loan to buy a signature yellow Jeep Wrangler. The collision with reality happened in November 2004. Peter Porco discovered the fraudulent loan and the forged tuition documents. He confronted his son in a series of increasingly dire emails. Peter told Chris that the lying was over, stating, "I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. I am not going to lie for you." For a narcissist like Chris, this was the death of his reputation. He even used a stolen password to access his father's credit report from his dormitory computer to see if Peter was tracking his other frauds. Realizing the walls were closing in, Chris decided the only way to save his lifestyle was to eliminate his parents. On the night of November 14, 2004, Chris set his plan into motion. He drove his yellow Jeep from the University of Rochester to Bethlehem, a 3-hour trip. To cover his tracks, he manually disabled the home security system using a master code known only to the family. He then went to the garage and retrieved a 3-foot felling axe that had the name Porco written on the handle in his father's own handwriting. Chris walked into his parents' bedroom while they were in a deep sleep. He struck his father multiple times in the head and neck and then turned the blade on his mother, Joan. Chris left both for dead, certain that no human could survive the trauma. He then drove back to Rochester, arriving in time to be seen by fellow students in the morning to create an alibi. The viral, horrifying hook of this case is what happened next. Peter Porco suffered catastrophic brain trauma, but the axe blows specifically spared his motor functions while destroying his higher-order cognitive processing. This resulted in the state described by pathologists as purposeful but mindless activity. Peter actually woke up. Unaware that he was dying, he performed his morning grooming routine. He brushed his teeth and attempted to load the dishwasher. He walked to the front door and touched the handle to retrieve the newspaper, leaving a trail of blood across the house, before finally collapsing in the foyer. When police arrived, Peter was dead, but miraculously, Joan Porco was still alive, despite losing an eye and part of her skull. As paramedics worked on her, Detective Christopher Bodish asked Joan if a family member had done this. When he asked, "Did Christopher do this?" Joan nodded her head up and down and squeezed his hand. This nod of identification became the chilling cornerstone of the case. During his initial interview, Chris never confessed. He acted confused, repeatedly asking detectives, "Is this a joke?" When told his father was dead and his mother was mutilated, he didn't shed a single tear. Instead, he focused entirely on his alibi of sleeping in a university lounge. Even more disturbing, while his mother was in a coma, neighbors saw Chris calmly washing his yellow Jeep in the driveway of the murder house, likely scrubbing away blood spatter or toll booth dust. The digital evidence was the final nail in the coffin. Investigators traced the IP address used to check Peter's credit report directly to Chris's dorm room. Though the defense argued that no DNA was found on the axe, the prosecution proved Chris had cleaned the weapon and that it originated from his own garage. In a display of staggering manipulation, Chris maintained his innocence and convinced his mother, who had lost her memory of the night, that he was a victim. Joan stood by her son during the trial, a heartbreaking sight for a community that knew the truth. In August 2006, Christopher Porco was found guilty of second-degree murder and attempted murder. Judge Jeffrey Berry sentenced him to 50 years to life, noting that the unfathomable cruelty of leaving his mother to live with the scars of the attack was as heinous as the murder itself. As of 2026, the 42-year-old is an inmate at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora. He has exhausted all his appeals and continues to maintain his innocence from behind bars. Chris Porco wanted to be a high roller. He ended up as just another number in the state prison system, a spoiled son who traded his family for a yellow Jeep and a felling axe. In the sun-drenched valleys of Fresno, California, the Ewell family represented the absolute pinnacle of the American success story. Dale Ewell was a self-made multi-millionaire who had built a massive aircraft dealership and a farming empire from the ground up. He and his wife Glee were pillars of their community, known for their philanthropy and their devotion to their 2 children, Tiffany and Dana. They lived in a high-security home and provided their 21-year-old son, Dana, with every luxury imaginable. But Dana didn't just want a life of luxury. He wanted total, undisputed control. He viewed himself as a prince of industry, a financial genius who was being held back by his parents' sensible rules. To Dana, his family wasn't a source of love. They were an $8 million hurdle standing between him and the life he felt he deserved. Dana was the ultimate spoiled narcissist, obsessed with the Billionaire Boys Club, a 1980s investment group that turned to murder. He modeled his tailor-made suits, his briefcase, and his entire fake persona after the group's leader, Joe Hunt. While attending Santa Clara University, he lived like a high-rolling executive, bragging to classmates about his supposed business brilliance. In reality, every cent he spent came from his father's hard work. But Dale Ewell was beginning to see through the facade. He was a practical man who valued grit, and he grew increasingly frustrated with Dana's lazy arrogance. He began to tighten the financial reins, threatening to delay Dana's inheritance until he reached the age of 35. For Dana, waiting 14 years was an insult. He decided he should not have to wait for his parents to die of old age. He formulated a plan to liquidate his entire family, his father, his mother, and his 24-year-old sister Tiffany, to ensure the $8 million estate fell into his hands immediately. Investigators even suspected Dana's hand in the mysterious death of his grandfather, who died in a suspicious basement explosion, though no charges were ever filed. Dana was too arrogant to get his own hands dirty, so he recruited a loyal soldier, his college roommate, Joel Radovich. Joel was a social outcast obsessed with tactical gear. Dana promised him a massive cut of the inheritance if Joe handled the wet work. They spent 7 months planning the triple assassination. Joel was so dedicated to the forensic details that he shaved his entire body hairless before the hit to ensure he left no DNA evidence at the scene. The massacre was scheduled for Easter Sunday, 1992. To ensure a perfect alibi, Dana spent the weekend with his girlfriend's family, several hours away. While Dana played the role of the polite student, Joel was at the Ewell home. He used a key provided by Dana and bypassed the complex security system. He was armed with a Feather 89 semi-automatic 9mm carbine, fitted with a homemade silencer built using tennis balls stuffed into a plastic tube to muffle the sound. Joel hid in the house and waited for hours. When Glee and Tiffany returned home first, Joe emerged from the shadows and executed them, shooting them multiple times. Forensic experts would later find tennis ball fibers from the silencer on their clothing. Joel then waited in the silent house for 30 minutes until Dale Ewell finally walked through the door. The multimillionaire was shot in the back, the final victim of his son's greed. The aftermath was a masterclass in deception. Gaynor returned home to discover the bodies and put on the performance of a lifetime. He was seen at the funeral sobbing uncontrollably, appearing so devastated he had to be physically supported. He gave heart-wrenching interviews, begging for information on the cowardly killers. But his arrogance was his undoing. While pretending to be broke and grieving, Dana stole $400,000 from his ailing grandmother, leaving her with only $2,000, barely enough for a month of nursing home care. Detectives John Souza and Chris Curtis noticed the bizarre connection between Dana and Joe. Dana was so unimpressed by the investigators that he referred to them as Sesame Street characters, specifically Bert and Ernie, mocking their intelligence to his friends. But the characters were outsmarting him. The breakthrough came when Ernest Jack Ponce, a friend who purchased the murder weapon for Joe, was granted immunity. He tied the whole conspiracy together, detailing the plot and the construction of the silencer. The digital evidence confirmed the betrayal. Dana used a specific pager system to send a numeric code to Joel, signifying the family had left their beach house and were precisely on schedule to arrive home to their deaths. During surveillance in May 1993, a detective wearing a recording device stood near Joel at a payphone and overheard him tell Dana they don't have evidence. It was the final nail in the coffin. At the trial in 1997, the prosecution presented Dana as a cold-blooded monster who viewed his family as line items on a balance sheet. The jury was deadlocked, 11-1, in favor of the death penalty for Dana. Because one single juror refused to vote for execution, the judge was forced to sentence him to life without parole instead. In May 1998, Dana Ewell was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. As of early 2026, the 55-year-old who once dreamed of being a business prince is an inmate at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. He has exhausted every legal appeal. Dana Ewell traded his family's lives and his own future for an $8 million inheritance he will never spend. From the son who turned a Thanksgiving celebration into a chemical slaughterhouse, to the prince who traded his entire bloodline for an $8 million inheritance, the stories of these 10 individuals represent the ultimate betrayal of the family bond. They are the children who were given every advantage, the heirs who were nurtured and protected, yet they chose to meet that devotion with cold-blooded violence. Their crimes leave a permanent scar on the concept of home and remain a chilling testament to the destructive power of pure, unadulterated greed. They are, without question, among the most evil, spoiled kids in prison today. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share your thoughts on these stories in the comments below. Which of these cases did you find the most disturbing?